Okay, so there's somebody with a rather distorted audio. Don't know how well that shows up, but yeah, you can tell that's definitely a radio with either a screwdriver AM modulation limiter, or it's just been clipped and the circuit's disabled. Just what I call crunchy audio. But so what we have here is a Teaberry Stalker 15 customer. Now this customer has a lot of radios, worked on several of his radios, and he's taken my advice that I give in a lot of my videos. If you think you can do it yourself, and what that is replacing the electrolytic capacitors. So this is like, I think, the 10th one that he's done. And had good success with it, so, saving himself a lot of money. If you can do the non-technical stuff yourself, that's great. You're going to save yourself a lot of money. Shoot, and like in his case, if he's done 10 radios, with the money that he's saved in recapping those 10 radios, he could go out and buy a bunch more. Not just one radio, he could go out and buy a lot more radios. So, now when it comes to the technical stuff, if you have problems doing transceiver alignments and other things like that, then you can take it to somebody and have proper transceiver alignment done, or if there's stuff that needs to be, diagnosed, troubleshot, and repaired, or if there's modifications that need to be undone, like this one. It had channel modifications, both on the ANL noise blanker and the signal RF and modulation meter switches. So neither of those switches did they did something, but it was the extra channels. And he wanted this radio basically put back to stock. So that was done, and luckily, whoever did the channel modification on this, for most of the wires, now they repurposed a few of them, understandably, but for most of the wires that were cut off for both of these functions, they just cut them off, or actually they desoldered them. They didn't even cut them, they actually properly desoldered the wires off of the board that these 3 switches mount to, and they were still down there. But it's still, even then, that can be a pain in the butt, quite honestly. Rewiring these switches, there's a lot of wires. You have to find where the feed point, you trace the wire back into the radio, see which wire's which, where it goes on the board. You have to pull the faceplate of the radio off, take the actual metal structure loose so you can kind of fold the front structure up a little bit. You take the screws out on either side of the switch, and then you can get that switch assembly out so you can actually get to it. But I did all of that. This has an unlocked clarifier, and it was not done properly. I don't know why I'm starting to see a lot more of them. And I'd have to assume that this clarifier has probably been unlocked for a few decades. I don't think it's a new thing, but it just, circumstances. Here recently, I've been getting a lot of radios with clarifiers that are unlocked partially. And I say partially because if you transmitted, put this radio into transmit, looked at it with a frequency counter or on a spectrum analyzer, and you turned the clarifier, you could watch your carrier move back and forth on the spectrum analyzer, or you could watch your frequency go up and down on the frequency counter. So it was changing the transmit frequency. The problem is the trimmer resistor on the inside, so the calibration point for your transmit frequency. So normally, the way a radio would come, I know I've gone over this a million times, out of the box, the receive frequency is the only thing that's adjusted with the clarifier out here. This does not affect transmit. And then when you're doing the transceiver alignment on these, there's a calibration trimmer resistor on the inside. Once you get done aligning the oscillators, you'll then put the radio into transmit, still checking at the same test point in the radio, and then you adjust that trimmer resistor so it's the same as the receive frequency. So there's basically 2 frequency adjustments. There's the one that you can change from the outside with the clarifier, receive, and then a transmit is supposed to be non-adjustable, by the user. So that's on the inside. And what you do is you disable that transmit only circuit in the radio so that the transmit and receive frequencies are locked together. So when you turn the clarifier, if it changes the frequency 100 Hertz, it's also changing it on transmit 100 Hertz. What I've been seeing is they'll have the clarifier, they'll have one end run to ground, the other end run to their voltage source, usually the 8-volt regulator in the radio, but that's all they do. They don't they don't remove the diode and the resistor that you need to remove in these radios to disable that transmit adjustment in here. So that still means that the transmit and receive frequencies can drift independently of each other. You can change the transmit out here, but it still has room for error on the inside with component tolerances. You're leaving all those other parts, to include that trimmer resistor inside, in circuit, so your transmit and receive frequencies could still be off frequency. And honestly, it just makes alignment impossible. There's honestly no way to properly adjust it. So that was done. All I had to do, like I say, remove a diode and a resistor, and then the clarifier was unlocked properly. Or actually, that's kind of a misnomer in terms. It's actually locked. Once you do the modification, you've locked it, because your receive and transmit frequencies are locked together. But that was taken care of. Now, he did have one complaint. There was a high-pitched noise he was complaining about in receive. It was completely independent of volume control. The squelch didn't matter what mode he was in, so he could put it in any mode. He could turn the squelch up the whole way. He could turn the RF gain down the whole way. Turn the volume down the whole way. There was always this kind of a high-pitched noise coming out of the speaker. I see this occasionally in radios, and it depends. And really what it has to do in this radio is the clock. So the clock works. As you can see, it's steadily chugging along there. But that clock actually operates off of 120 volts AC. So the motor on this is not low voltage. It's high voltage, runs right off of your mains. That's why when you turn the radio off, it's still running. The DC power, try that again. The DC power supply is turned off now, but the clock's still running. That's because it's running off of the AC. And the problem with that is, normally in radios that don't have a clock, the only place AC is present inside of your radio is at the power cord. It comes in, depending on the radio, how it runs through. Some radios have more fuses than others. They'll put a fuse on the AC and the DC circuits. But in any case, the problem is, a normal radio would only have AC present right back here, basically back in the back corner, depending on the radio. Shoot, it could be over there. But it's isolated on the underside of the radio, and there's not a lot of wires. In this radio, the AC also runs up. Move the camera angle here. It also comes up to the clock motor. So, you've got these two wire nuts, and yes, wire nuts are factory. People have asked me about that. Oh man, it looks like somebody bodged it. No, it's kind of a, I guess you could say, triple protection. On the manufacturers trying to protect people like me, I guess, techs. Because, of course, owners shouldn't really be inside their radio unless you know what you're doing when it's turned on. But they do this, and they actually twist the wires together. They solder them. Then they put a wire nut on it. Then they wrap electric tape around each of the wire nuts individually, and then wrap that in electric tape together. They do that for safety. That way it's really, really hard to get this stuff off and get to the live voltage. They're, trying to protect people from getting electrocuted. So yeah, that's normal. But that's AC. There's 100, I'm holding on to 120 volts AC source right there, inside those wire nuts. So, and that's the problem. Also, your DC power source comes off of the power supply, goes back down to the fuse, and then gets routed directly. All those wires are running right beside each other up here, and then it jogs down to the board and goes to the on-off switch on the front of the radio. So the power supply is doing a very good job. You have bridge rectifier, turns your AC into DC. You have your filter capacitor, is filtering out that hum. Actually, there's two capacitors on the board, but that filters out your AC ripple voltage off of that DC that's coming out of the bridge rectifier, and it's good and clean. You can hook up a scope right now. I even did that in this just to check. I had very little AC ripple voltage, but if you hooked up a scope to the on-off switch on this thing, there was a horrible AC ripple there. I mean, we're talking, God, I think it was like a couple hundred millivolts. I mean, serious AC ripple at the on-off control. And if I took an electrolytic capacitor and just touched it to DC ground and the power right at the back of the on-off switch, that noise went away. So that's the problem. It's picking up hum in these wires right here. And when I get this radio turned over, I'll show you what I did to alleviate that problem. Other than that, like I said, I've just completed the alignment. The owner had recapped it, used all good quality caps, so it's got all niche. Looks like I think every capacitor in here is Nichicon, so used good quality capacitors. One other thing I did have to do after I actually got those switches rewired, got the channel modifications removed, got the radio turned back on, was getting ready to do my alignment. I do my initial test to make sure transmit and receiver working okay, and I had my communications test set to probably like channel 20 and keyed to radio, and I didn't see anything. What the heck's going on here? I put the span out to like a megahertz, and I can just barely see something over on the edge of the screen. So that's 500 kilohertz away. So I've broadened the span out to 2 megahertz, and yep, sure enough, there was the peak, way out at 27.8 something. I'm like, what the hell? And it didn't take me too long. Fiddling around, looking at the PLL, I just really quick grabbed a voltmeter, checked the voltage at the programmable divider input pins on the PLL chip. All the voltages, voltage or grounds, were correct. And then it dawned on me, somebody did a channel mod. This radio would have originally had an 11.1125 crystal in it, and to get extra channels that are higher, you have to actually change that crystal. It's very easy to get lower frequencies in this radio, but it's kind of hard to get many up above channel 40 because of that 11.1125 crystal. So what you have to do is put in an 11.32, whatever, 3258 megahertz crystal. So that's what it had in it. So I took that crystal out, put the proper 11.1125 crystal in it, and bam, back channel 20 was transmitting and receiving on the proper channel 20. So other than that, I don't think I really did anything. I did now he did remove the glue, like when he removed the capacitors, he had removed the corrosive conductive glue already. But I told him, I said, this still has all the glue around all of the crystals and a few other parts in here. And I said, do you want me to do it, or you can do it yourself? He said, I can take care of that. He said, as long as after you do the alignment, if I remove that glue, is it going to change the alignment? I said, no, you're not going to be adjusting anything. You're just going to be taking a few parts off the board, clean the glue off, put the parts back in, and solder them in. So he can do that himself. Again, saving himself some money. So I think that's pretty much it on the top side. I still have a few wires. I got to rewire tie the wires over here because I actually had to cut a few of the wire ties off to trace out some of those wires for the switches down here. But I think that's pretty much it on the top. So let me just turn off my AC power supply over there. Get the antenna unhooked and flip it over. Oh, and I did have to re-enable the AMC ALC circuits. They were both disabled. So yes, it was just like that guy we were listening to at the beginning of the video who was distorted. This thing would have been distorted, or was distorted. So that's been put back. So here's the underside, and here's what I came up with. Really simple. I just disconnected the power wire from the on-off switch, ran it, added a terminal strip, didn't drill any holes. There was already a hole here, so I just added a terminal strip underneath here. Instead of the wire running to the switch, the wire actually comes, there's a rubber grommet under here. You can just barely see it. I added in another hole so the wire doesn't chafe through. But ran the wire up to this terminal strip and then down to the on-off switch. So this is adding some extra, and then the negatives attached to the DC board ground over here. But adding that capacitor there, again, removed the AC ripple voltage, and it got rid of that annoying hum noise in the speaker. Like I said, it was just there all the time. Anytime the radio was turned on, you had that noise. And if you ever have that, and you're not sure if that's what it is AC hum, or is there actually a problem with the radio, this radio is a perfect example of how that's very easy to diagnose, and it's one of the first things I did was connect. Now, make sure it's a radio where, now some radios, like if they're cybernets, the power cord isn't permanently attached to the radio and come in. They actually have a socket on the back, and it has a little switch. If you look inside that plug on the back of the radio, there's actually a little switch in there. And when you plug in an AC power cord, it disconnects the DC socket. And when you unplug the AC power cord, the switch flips, and it then switches over to accepting power from the DC power cord. These radios, however, the unit and chassis, has an AC-DC switch on the back. So what you can do is plug in your radio to the AC, your AC mains, and then also if you happen to have a DC power supply, You can, and this just uses your normal power cord like a mobile radio would use. Also plug that in and turn it on. Turn the radio on and just flip between DC and AC. DC, AC. If you have that annoying buzz in AC and it goes away when you flip over to DC, yes, you have AC hum. It's just getting into your receiver, basically. Now, like I say, if it has an electric clock motor, that may be the whole problem. There's just, like I say, there's the wire, the AC gets routed through extra portions inside the radio, and it just ends up leaching back into your DC circuit. So, simple filter cap, an extra filter cap, remove that. 2 wires over here, about the only thing that's really modified on the underside of this radio anymore, and I'll get these actually tied up. This is the way it was, but this is the Clarifier unlock modification, so, you know, they got one going down to ground, the other one going over to the 8-volt regulator. But otherwise, the cut traces have been repaired on the PLL chip, all the wires, all that stuff was removed. There's a couple other wires added in here for those switch mods. Those have all been pulled off. So now it's just a good working radio. The only thing I need to do is basically just give it a quick little dust off, and then put the covers on it, and it'll be ready to go. You'll be ready to use this thing for, you know, put this on air and be a good sounding radio. And again, a clean sounding radio. One of the most important things. It's not going to sound distorted. So there you go. Just thought I'd show a quick inside of this. And kind of a, like I say, a nudge for people to do it. So here's another radio that someone, you know, the owner took it upon himself. Now granted, he had to invest in a little bit of tools. He's got to source the capacitors. But it's your time. So, you know, you can either use your time and save some money, or just spend your money and pay somebody else like me to do all the work. Now, some people say, Mike, that kind of doesn't make any sense. If you're telling people to work on their own radios, how in the hell are you going to make any money? Trust me, there's hardly anybody that works on radios anymore. You know, I work on, if I'm lucky, 10, 15, maybe at the most 20% of the radio. If, you know, people that contact me about working on radios, I'm lucky, somewhere between 10 to 20% of them is what I actually work on. I have to turn away 80 to 90% of the work that gets requested. Just don't have time. One person can only do so much. So, you know, by people doing stuff like this, I actually get to work on more radios because they've done a lot of the time-consuming work themselves. They're replacing electrolytic capacitors. He removed most of the glue. Now that I've, you know, told him that he should remove the rest of it, he can remove that. But again, I'm not doing that work. I'm still getting the radios to work on. You know, people say, well, you're losing business. No, I still get the radios. I still had to do, you know, diagnostics on the hum. I still had to undo the modifications, re-enable the AMC ALC limiters. I had to do the transceiver alignment. So, you know, I'm still getting plenty of work out of it. And like I say, then, the owner of the radio, the radio's even more yours then. You know, if you do some of this simple work yourself, it gives you pride in the radio because now you have actually done something to it. So, there you go. Teaberry Stalker 15. Like I say, really nice condition. The only real flaw, I mean, it's got a few little nicks in the top. I might actually try and get those little nick marks in the top of the silvering right there straightened out for them. But the only real flaw this thing has, some scratch marks in the hours dial right here. I guess at some point in time there was a piece of wire, I don't know, but there was something obviously inside this thing that was laying up against the hour dial, and it's rubbed some lines. You can just see that little line to the right in between the 1 and the 0. So there's a couple little, if I get flipped around to the 1, you can see there's a little bit of blackening on the digit there. That doesn't show up very well, does it? But you can see the line there. There's kind of a little black line there, a little black line in the 1 there. And yeah, like I say, something rubbed on there. I tried cleaning that off, and I don't want to go rubbing too much because I don't want to actually remove the paint and make things worse. But yeah, something just kind of scuffed around the indicator wheel there. But other than that, it looks fine. And that's no biggie. I mean, at first, at a glance, you'd never even notice that unless you were really nitpicking the radio, looking it over. But there you go, another radio back up and ready to use.